To another episode of Card Talk, a podcast where we spend just a little bit of time talking about cards from Lord of the Rings card game. I am your host, Dave Walsh.
And I'm Ted Bannock, and I love talking about cards, and we're just going to air it all out today. We're just going to take everything that we want to say about cards, and we're just going to put it out there, air it out, and I think it's gonna be a good time.
Okay. I don't know what Ted's talking about anymore. So before we get into the card for today, let's just take a little bit of time to thank all our amazing patrons. If you want to become a patron, you can go to, we put the addresses of the websites right over here, but it's patreon.com/cardtalk2018. And there you can join our little family here, help us with all the hosting fees, and help us do what we like to do here and bring this stuff to the community, something that you guys can listen to or watch, on your commute or whenever. So we also have a blog. If Matt over at the blog writes a review for every card that we review on the podcast, so he's busy over there. That's cardtalk2018.com. You can send us an email, cardtalk2018@gmail.com, and we have second breakfast every other Sunday. Micah's over at our YouTube channel doing some live playthroughs for the community, and so that's a lot of fun. So I don't know. We got a lot of things going on here for you to enjoy. So, including this card that we're going to talk about today.
That's right.
Yeah. Thank you for the. Now Ted's ignoring me because I'm just rambling on. He's like, "Okay, get to the card, Dave."
We got a wonderful episode. I'm excited to talk about today's card.
We're back to the episode being wonderful.
I speak the truth. Today's card is the Heir of Valandil. It is a leadership attachment that costs 2. It is a title trait. It reads, attached to a Dunedain hero. Planning action. Exhaust Heir of Valandil to reduce the cost of the next Dunedain ally you play this phase by 1 for each enemy engaged with you.
But my home, such as I have, is in the north, for here the heirs of Valandil have ever dwelt in long line unbroken from father unto son for many generations. Aragorn, Fellowship of the King. Which is interesting because Ted and I were having a little bit of an argument about, not an argument, but we were trying to figure out who was pictured, because it looks a lot like Halbarad. Right, Ted?
Yeah, we're going to skip a little bit and talk about some of the art here and the lore. It's all going to be intertwined. So, for the longest time, exactly what Dave said, I thought Halbarad was on this card, and that made no sense to me. But if you inspect it further, you will realize that it's by the same artist. Do not ask me how to pronounce their name. Smirtuli is the same artist as Halbarad. And the person in the picture and the hero version of Halbarad are wearing the same getup.
Yeah, it's definitely. And I think it's like written. I think it's like presented in the same style of artwork too. Mm-hmm. So it definitely is very reminiscent of the Halbarad art. But I will say that the Valandil was, I guess, the youngest son of Isildur. Isildur had 4 children, and Valandil was then the son, and then Valandil, through many, many, many generations, then out of that came Arathorn II, which is Aragorn LSR Aragorn, the one that we know of in from Return of the King. So Valandil is there. I would say, let me see if I can say this a little more succinctly, is I think a lot of people understand that Aragorn was descended from Isildur, but maybe not understand where Valandil fits in there. So Isildur here, Valandil next, many generations, including names that we know of, and then Arathorn, his dad, and then Aragorn after 20.
Yeah, so he's descendant upon that child of Isildur as opposed to the other ones.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's where Heir of Valandil has a picture of Aragorn on it. So, but what about the card, Ted? I will say that, I've made it pretty obvious the past couple of episodes that I don't play Dunedain decks all that often. I think they're hard to build solo. Not to say you can't build them solo, but I feel like you do. So, I guess the question is, because this is a planning action, is 2 cost worth the reduction of 1 for each enemy engaged with you?
It is. It's a fair cost. Because, so let's face it, this is like a Dunedain archetype only card, because it has to go on a Dunedain hero, and then you have to have an enemy engage with you to get a benefit from it.
Right.
So,
and you're only getting the cost reduced by the next Dunedain ally you're playing.
Yeah, it's very specific.
So it's very, very specific. So so this is not going to hit the table very often for me. So.
Sure. Yeah, you got to be playing that archetype, and that's it. It's very narrow in its design. But it certainly is a big booster because its cost reduction is resource acceleration, right? It lets you put more cards on the table, and your usual plan with a Dunedain deck is to give you at least 1. And something to compare this to is
to
probably
give you at least 1 what?
1 reduction.
Oh, okay.
Right? To give you at least 1 reduction on an ally.
Okay.
You might compare this to Steward of Gondor, which is a 2-cost card that just goes on any hero and gives you 2 resources to turn when you exhaust it. And is there a reason you'd play one over the other? Unless you're playing in a group of players and somebody has Steward of Gondor in their deck, this is a card to give you resources when you don't have access to Steward because it may be already on the table. Otherwise, it could be a supplement to that, and then you're just like flowing in resources because you get 2 from Steward and then you get an additional reduction. But it's reduction of probably 1, and it could be 2. Is pretty strong because that's what you're aiming for. So when you have this 1 enemy engage with you, you're trying to get multiple triggers that outweigh, like you have benefits that outweigh having the 1 enemy engage with you turn over turn. And this, I think, is a big part of the strategy.
Right. And there's nothing wrong, despite me not playing the Dunedain archetype often. There's nothing wrong with having cards in the card pool because it's such a robust card pool that do something very niche like this. And so, just because it's not a card that I play with doesn't mean it's useless. It just means that I don't play with this card, right? I see the ability, and when you go down the list of Dunedain allies, it doesn't say unique Dunedain allies, but when you go down the list of Dunedain allies, they're expensive. The one that comes to mind where you would probably want, in a Dunedain deck is the Dunedain Watcher. 3 cost, it cancels you get rid of it and it gets, it gets rid of a shadow effect. That's a great effect, but wouldn't it be great if you could put that into play for 1 cost and then not feel so strapped for the 3 costs that it costs? So I see the value in this card, but, when you go down through the allies, even ally Halbarad costs 4, right? The Dunedain archetype seems to cost a lot to get out on the board, unless you're playing Dunedain Hunter. What's the one that brings out a location?
That's the Dunedain Pathfinder.
The Pathfinder, right?
Spirit, and it's
Which is
also
spirit.
a zero cost
Right.
card.
So obviously you're not using them for that, but
Right.
you know,
right.
but I feel like the Dunedain is an expensive archetype. I mean, I don't know if that's exactly. It's not Sylvans. You know, Sylvans, you're putting out, 2 or 3 Sylvans around because it costs, they cost 1 and 2 and stuff like that. And you can just do it. But
yeah, there's a couple ones that are expensive that you named. The Watcher. Did you say? I think you said Guardian of Arnor.
I didn't say. I brought that up.
Okay.
A couple episodes ago.
Yeah, so there's a couple. Fornos Bowman is a 3-cost tactics one. You have ones that are expensive in every sphere. You have Sarnford Sentry and Lore that cost 3, and Warden of Anubanos is a 4-cost spirit. So you definitely have your share of ones that are expensive, and so getting any reduction on them is incredibly helpful. You still have to, of course, match spheres. So if you're running a multi-sphere deck or dual sphere, whatever, you got to keep that in mind. But to put this into play for 2, and then there's going to be some turns where you might be getting the 2 resources from it, or maybe 3, right? Maybe you're getting a free if you have 3.
Yeah.
If you play this in combination with, if you can get an ally, if you can get an enemy engaged with you during the planning phase, also through the Dunedain Hunter, through the
Son of Arnor,
Son of Arnor, through some of those things, which you're going to be doing in a Dunedain deck anyway. It all kind of mixes together to get these effects. So. And a Dunedain deck it's going to be leadership. There's too many good leadership cards and heroes, and this is one of them. This is one of the main ones.
You have Rohirrim, that as soon as something engages you, you can attack it. So there's so there's ways to deal with those things that when enemies are. So you can, I guess you can't take the planning action. Like if you. So I guess it's a rules thing. Let's make sure we get this right. So if you pull out, let's say you have the Dunedain Hunter, you pull out a card, and you get the enemy and it engages you. You then can play the Heir of Valandil. You can exhaust the Heir of Valandil to get the 1 reduction. Or you could exhaust Rohirrim to attack the enemy, because Rohirrim allows you, as soon as you engage it, to attack it, but you can't do both because it's the next game action. So now you haven't just engaged, right, the enemy, right? So so if you're using Rohirrim to kill the enemy that you just engaged, then you've lost the Heir of Valandil. And then if you use the Heir of Valandil to get the reduction, then you can't use Rohirrim because you haven't just engaged the enemy. You know what I mean? That's
sure.
But I mean, I'm probably going deep into the weeds. Bring us back then.
Yeah. I was gonna say, generally, you don't want to kill that enemy right away with the Dunedain strategy. You want to put it in play and leave it for turn over turn, or round over round. But also, a big part of that strategy is keeping enemies. We've mentioned this before in the last couple episodes. For some of these Dunedain cards, you want an enemy engaged with you. So we mentioned Forest Snare is a great trap from the core set that makes an enemy stop attacking. There's also a couple of tactics traps. There's 2 ones, Followed and Outmatched. And the same thing, if you have those enemies in front of you, this is another big benefit to get this extra resources by reducing the cost of your allies, making your allies cheaper. And like you said, there's plenty of allies to pick from.
Right. And it's the only thing that's not restricted, it's just as any ally. So you're not restricted to leadership allies, or, you can pick any ally.
Yeah, that is Dunedain. Yeah.
So, as long as it's Dunedain, yeah.
Yeah. So it's good, and like I said, it really helps. Um, it's like if you're running Steward of Gondor in your deck, you probably don't need like 3 of this card. You can probably get by with like 1,
Hmm.
and then mostly you rely on Steward, but then you get this in addition, which just helps you to continue to build resources, which are great to have. And then in a multiplayer game where you might have to take out Steward of Gondor because you're graciously letting somebody else play with it, you have this as a backup, and then you can run 2 copies, maybe even 3 if it's really, if you have those expensive allies and you're having enemies engage with you anyway.
Yeah, so that's what I was gonna say. It's like I was gonna ask you, like, when you play this card or when you deck build with this card, you answered like how many do you need, but then how many like does this how many what do I want to say? How many Dunedain heroes do you need? How many allies do you need in a deck that are Dunedain? Like, what's the kind of the minimums as you've played this card to make this card work for you?
Sure, that's a great question. You technically only need 1 Dunedain hero to equip it to, but a lot of times you're running more than 1. A lot of times you're running 2, because you're running some version of Aragorn, either his tactics or maybe his leadership version, alongside either or both Amarthiel and Halbarad. There's plenty of other good heroes too. That like Moblong works really well with Dunedain because he's not Dunedain, he's Gondor. But if your plan is to fight enemies, he gives you resources for fighting enemies.
Why would
like,
right?
Yeah, he's great for that deck and archetype as well. But yeah, you do want to have enough allies in your deck. If you're only running 10 allies, well, this card's probably not worth it. But I'd say when you're kind of past that mark, when you're hitting the maybe like 15 or so, because I don't think there's too many unique Dunedain allies, but there's a few. There's the ally version of Halbarad, which we mentioned on the hero episode, which is great with this card, because you could. Halbarad ally's ability is to reduce his cost equal to the number of enemies you have engaged with you. So if you have 2 and you Heir of Valandil him, he's free. Because his own ability makes him cost 2 less, and then this card makes him cost 2 less.
Right, and of course
that's
you can
pretty
stack
good.
them. Rules thing, you can stack them, so you get a 2/2/3 ally for no cost.
Yeah, that seems okay.
That seems
So, let me just take a quick other pass here at Dunedain allies, but we talked about they're more expensive. You probably want to have anywhere between like 15 and 20, I would say.
And that's in a standard 50 card deck.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, the good thing about this while you're looking this up is that it's not asking you to go dig for one, or if the next card is a Dunedain ally, play it for a reduced cost. You just have to have it in your hand, right? Like it's tricksy, but it's not that tricksy. But it's also obviously written to fit into a Dunedain deck. Period. In the story.
Yeah, and there's even lots of 2-cost ones. There's 4 unique ones. We forget about our one of our fan favorite Dunedain's allies, Thalion.
Oh, Thalion. He's neutral, right?
He's neutral, so he'll go no matter what sphere heroes you are. You're probably wanting at least 1 copy of him, and you can reduce his costs. It was a very familiar looking face.
Handsome, that.
Yeah.
For anybody who doesn't know, Thalion is the 5-year art for one of the major designers of the game, Caleb Grease. So
yeah. You got Ranger of Cardalin, who's neutral, which also has a great ability, but you may want to hard cast him.
You're gonna cheat the Ranger of Cardalin into play.
Yeah, but only for 1 turn.
Right.
But yeah, so you got ones that cost 4.
You have options.
You get ones that cost 2, like the Guardsman. Like there's costs of all ranges from 2 to 4. And there's lots of great targets from many different spheres, including in the core set. You have Son of Arnor and Northern Tracker.
Yeah, the Northern Tracker 4 cost. Warden of Arnor 3.
Son of Arnor.
Son of Arnor is 3, right?
But then you have Warden of Numinos, who's 4 and is also
right. This is why I think like the Dunedain archetype is expensive, right? Like maybe that's not. Maybe if you like cost average all of the allies, it's not expensive. But
yeah, I'd say it's they get some good benefits. Some of the allies do, but there's like a tipping point by the time they're good, you might be like overwhelmed with enemies. I feel like, so it's a balancing act, and I kind of think about it comparatively to the Rohan archetype, because the Rohan archetype has some really great cards, but it can be challenging from a deck building perspective to be like, well, if I have all these allies coming in and leaving play to get these bonuses, how do I build a board state?
Right.
And Dunedain's the same way. It's like if you're just, come on, enemies, I'm going to bring them into play and bring them to me. You have to be able to like handle that.
Right. So
it's very fun to deck build around, and this card is, I think, a key piece. So like I said, you probably want to run 2 copies of it. And if it's your main card, you're probably I would say run 3 copies to help you get one early, so you can start paying for those allies and saving your resources then for events and attachments, which you also need to be successful.
Yeah. I mean, and that's it, right? So if you have 2 resources in round 1, in round 2, you have 2 resources to play, and you have an Heir of Valandil in play. Like you can make that a 3-cost ally instead of a 2-cost ally. So you get better. Mm-hmm. You're just improving your board state by so.
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably not. There's even a couple scenarios where you start engaged with enemies.
Yeah, Escape from Umbar are super popular, and you start with 1 engaged from you.
Yeah, so those quests are great for Dunedain archetype decks, and then you could play this card even first turn and immediately gets benefit. Otherwise, it's not generally a first turn play, because unless you're doing one of those scenarios, it gives you no benefit. You're better off, playing an attachment or saving your resources for the next turn, or playing an event or a cheaper ally that you can afford that will immediately give you some willpower or attack or something.
Well, should we just very quickly talk about the scene of the art and then move on?
Yeah. Like I said, we established that. Like it's, to me, it looks like it is Aragorn dressed in Halbarad's attire from his hero.
Right. And I'm wondering what the location is. So I mean, the Grey Company, they went through the Paths of the Dead. Okay. I was going to use the official thing, and the Dwemer, I just completely lost it.
Someone's yelling into their
into their device. But I'm wondering if that's there because he was part of the Grey Company, or maybe this is something. It looks cave-like a little bit, but then the thing that's surrounding him looks a little more Gondor-ish. It's
handmade for sure.
Yeah,
but it looks like there's also this natural cave. Yeah. And then I don't know what it is I don't know what it is he's looking at. It looks like it could be a spear.
Yeah, but I don't think he's looking at that. I think that's just right. I think that's just off to the side. Like this is, I want the art brief. Caleb, if you're listening to this show, I want to see what the art brief was. MJ probably had something to do with this art brief. I want to know what the art brief is for this.
Yeah, so
draw Aragorn in a, Autumno.
Yeah.
You know, like the ice palace. You know,
It looks even like I said, it's like a man-made structure mixed with it, because you have like a pillar in the middle,
yeah,
but it's like built into, or the cave
yeah.
is like
It's like
it's
roughly
so
hewn or
bizarre.
not. Yeah, I know. Yeah,
So it's cool. Like, I do get the sense of like nobility from the look in the face,
right.
right? Like, he is, you're right. I think I can actually tell that, yeah, he's looking off maybe in the distance or towards something else, rather than what's on the wall.
Right.
So like that part of it's cool, but like the rest of it confuses me.
Yeah, I'm just confused. And so, you know, it's sorry, right? I mean, the
Yeah.
artwork itself is fine. You know, like it's just confusing as somebody who is playing Lord of the Rings. So,
But aside from that, we can put a ring around that we can put a fur ring around
first stole
yeah, around Aragorn's
around
neck.
a fluffy apple bottom jeans, boots with the fur. The whole room's looking at him.
The card talk.
Yeah. Anyways,
It's another track.
yeah. Anyways, so for anybody who doesn't know or who's new to the show or may have forgotten, we have a highly scientific yet arbitrary system where we rank a card on a scale from 1 to 10, where 1 is the one card in the game to rule them all, or a card that's very good, and then we have a card ranked 10, scale from 1 to 10, where 10 is the card that gets thrown back into the fiery chasm from whence it came, or not a very good card. So, Ted, how are you going to ring the Heir of Valandil?
So as I mentioned, the Dunedain archetype is challenging to play, but this card is very key to it, and it's one of the biggest benefits you get. It has, of course, this glaring weakness to it, which is you have to draw it in your hand, David. That's right. You have to have this card in your hand. You got to dig for it, right? So if you don't have it, it can be tough to play your allies. When you do, it's probably giving you a 1 reduction, which is good. It'll pay for itself in 2 turns. So it's also not like a late game card. You want it kind of early to mid game to help you capitalize. So it's a very balancing card. So I have to look at this card also in the perspective of like, it's not an all around card, as we mentioned, but I look at it inside the archetype of the Dunedain, because that's what it's for and what it's meant to do. And this is one of the biggest benefits. So I'm going to put it in the middle of the road because of that. I'm going to give it a 5 because it is specific to Dunedain, but it really powers the archetype. It really, really helps.
Yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying, right?
Yeah, I'm not going to make a Dunedain deck without this card.
Is that true?
Yeah, every single. I'm going to.
You're not even going to just use Steward of Gondor and be done with it. I know that we talked about it.
Yeah, I will still run at least 1 copy of this card because again, I have to draw a Steward also, right? So this is another card to get me resources faster. So it's a great card to even run with it. And then, as we mentioned before, it's a substitute if you don't get to play it for the unique rules.
I mean, I'm going to just, again, we've been on a streak here of 3 shows where we're talking about how, that my Dunedain, I don't know if it's a weakness, but just like hesitation, try to build a solo Dunedain deck.
I pointed out they pair pretty well with your precious hobbits,
and I have admitted that I did when we talked about
and that
Halbrand.
Fits too, because you think about like the Dunedains traveling
and what they
do,
the
hobbits.
Yep,
there's a deck there for you, David.
There is, and I'm going to try to put one together soon. But I still think like Halbrand, this card doesn't like inspire me to put together a deck. I think it's literally, it goes into a Dunedain deck, and I don't even like, without having used this, I don't think playing solo that I would need the Heir of Valandil in my Dunedain deck. Like I could just get around playing with Steward of Gondor or with some other resource. I don't know. There's not much other general resource acceleration, but like I don't know. So so I just think that this card is going to fall like to an 8 for me playing solo. Because like I said, this card fits right into that one thing, and then it's done. Like it doesn't go out there. Even though, people are screaming into their devices that, of course I rank hobbits and only go into hobbit decks higher because I actually play those, and I'm, I get it, but it's highly scientific and arbitrary. So, so highly arbitrary and scientific. It's all of that. So I don't know. So 8. That's an ocho for me.
Yeah. Well, there you have it. There's going to be some things that maybe we didn't think of or mention, so make sure to check out the blog write-ups too for some of Matt's thoughts and playthrough experiences as well.
Okay. Well, I guess that's about it. And everybody, we'll see you again next week. Have a great day.
Do you love the content? Here's what you can do to stay connected. Become a patron. The money collected through Patreon goes into keeping the lights on here at the podcast. We love our patrons, and you can join at many different levels. Visit patreon.com/cardtalk2018. You can subscribe to us, whether you're watching our YouTube channel or you're listening to us in your favorite podcatcher. Hit the subscribe button to get notifications of all our new episodes. Didn't know we were an audio podcast? Find us by searching Card Talk to get access to our 120 plus regular episodes. Didn't know we were a video channel? Find us by searching Card Talk LOTR LCG on YouTube, and there you can find not only our regular episodes, but you can find our bonus playthroughs and other content related to the game. Want to get a hold of Ted, Grant, or myself? Feel free to email the podcast at cardtalk2018@gmail.com.